My life has been pretty wild as of late, and I haven't been able to find anybody that's strong anything about a huge problem that we have, probably worldwide, but at least everywhere I can see and hear. I want to open up dialogue about all the problems we're causing to our kids with all of the neglect and the overstimulation that they're getting. Our world's becoming hypersexualized and under mentalized. And I think a lot of it stems from molestation, and it's generations deep at this point on a very large front, and it's not openly spoken about, and it's not going to fix itself. I can tell you a story about one family that I know about that is broad spectrum of of what you can hear. So I don't know much about the first part, but I do know that there was a girl quite some time ago that got molested, and the man who was doing that to her was found dead. And people knew about it. They knew about the molestation, they knew about the death. And no one looked into it. And if that's how we're going to handle it, that's definitely one way. And later in life, that girl married a man. And after the kids were grown, he began drinking a lot and fell apart. And it turned out that his father, who was a high ranking member in the church, was raping and molesting him for years. Uh, and as things went, nobody knew about it, or very few people. I didn't know about it. And his family ended up disowning him because he was too much to handle, because he didn't know how to deal with it and he couldn't deal with it. And he even the kind of man that was molested was one that had added on to his house so his parents could live with him. They lived in the same house in a later age. And that says something to me on both sides, that he's a very strong man and also that he didn't know how to handle it either. Because for decades he had known that how his wife's molester was handled. End of the day, that family still claims to be Christian. The man drank himself to death alone, desperate. And when they send out the advertisements for his funeral, they also added his parents' names to it, which I felt was the greatest slight you could ever give someone. And so we're looking at a spectrum of a woman gets molested, the perpetrator is murdered. A man gets molested, deals with it for his whole life, lives with the people that did it to him, lived with that shame, lived with that guilt, lived with those questions. and his whole family disowned him because he was drunk and couldn't figure it out. And then they buried him with his parents' name on his death certificate, basically, knowing what had happened. Those are two vastly different outcomes. Same family. When I was young, my church disintegrated, and I didn't really know what was going on with it. I was too young. When I was 35, I had my first child, my only child, and things were really eating at me because I felt like I needed to protect her. I didn't know why. I was frantic. Part of it was probably COVID. Part of it was a distrust I've had for my family for my entire life. When she was about 6 months old, my parents reminded me that I had been molested when I was 3. I didn't recall it, but then they refused to talk about it. And at first, I accepted it as they were shameful, or they had been scared about, like how do you deal with that? They didn't know how to deal with it 35 years earlier, 32 years earlier. And they just expected it to go away. And I wasn't allowing it to. Because I didn't feel like if they were going to protect me like that, by just ignoring it, pushing it under the rug, then that's how they would protect my daughter. I didn't want them around her. And the more they refused to talk to me about it, the more suspicious I got. Why? What were the reasons why they wouldn't talk to me? And the more I dug into it, the more I found out things that I had forgotten long past about one of the pastors that left. He was alleged to be molesting at his next church. The boy who molested me, there were 4 people in the room, so there was 2 others besides him. I don't even know who they were, but he was from the church too. I'm assuming they all were. And around the same time, one of the kids from the church killed themselves. And all of this stuff just coming together, and I'm thinking to myself, what was going on that all these parents from the church, all of these people from the church know all of these things, and nobody's doing anything, nobody's talking about it. And 30 years later, we still haven't dealt with it. Even if it didn't affect very many people in the church, it still affected people in the church. And you would think that would have been something that was. Also, the person that my dad went to when he was looking for advice about what to do when I was molested when I was 3, he went to the one pastor who was allegedly molesting later. And even at that point, they still my parents said I had anger problems, and they put me in therapy for that, but they never had me work out that whole bit of it. And so as it went on, my baby's mom kept dropping my daughter off at their place and saying I had to go through them in order to see her. I couldn't see her at my friends' houses or anything like that. I had to be at their house in order to see it, and that was the one place I told her I didn't want to be because they didn't talk to me about it. So they refused to talk about it, so I called cops. called lawyers. And when I called the cops in their town, there was no recourse. They called my parents, and when the police called me back, they said that my father had said he had gotten a lawyer, and if I wanted to talk to him through the lawyer. And all of that tells me that they're hiding something, and whether or not they are, I don't know. Whether or not they're afraid of something, I don't know. But I got more upset, more suspicious, and my child continued to go there and continued to be harder and harder for me to see. So I started talking to people out and about at bars and restaurants and hotels, and I was like, wow, this is more than half the people have a story of their own. And the more I talked to people, the more it frightened me. That all these people have stories that aren't dealt with. You know, and some people, I saw them later, and it opened up Pandora's box into a demon hole for them, and I could see it in their eyes, and it wasn't good, and it wasn't good for me either. I got engaged 10 years ago, and later in the relationship, her dad was always an odd fellow, and later in the relationship, her mom told me that he had been molested, and it didn't make sense to me. And he was constantly in a place of panic. You could see it in his eyes. I didn't understand it until I was the one with the panic in my eyes. Fight or flight, and we're fighting, bud. But I couldn't fight. No one was on my side. Because it's that balance of the scales, whether they're dead or whether the person gets shunned for it. More often than not, it's shunned. It's ruined a lot of lives. And a lot of people don't want to talk about it. Parents will refuse to talk about it. And a lot of times, in my experience, these things went on for it's far too late in the game for people to come back legally. But I think a lot of people just want to mourn whatever that is and get closure and get things figured out. There's so much shame from the parents or from whoever, and there is a line. There's definitely a line. I would say that some people are just sick. Some people are just naturally like that. Some people are out there hurting people. But it's a terrifying topic. And very few people talk about it. I equate it similarly to like miscarriages for a woman. That's not something a man can go through, but men live with women that go through it, and it's another thing that's very difficult to talk about, even though it's very common. It's very sensitive, very personal, but it's something that can maybe be healed. I know it's not going to get better if we don't shed some light on it and let it air. I mean, we have to know that it's very deep. If we can all collectively know that it's happening on a large scale, but everyone's too scared to point a finger. You never know what the outcome will be.